maybe you have a relationship issue of your own with your partner, with your spouse, with a parent that you really need to address, because that's just going to kind of keep sucking the life out of you.
Hi, and welcome to another Family Care Learning podcast. My name is Haley, and I'm a child and family therapist here and a family coach. And we have Sarah with us today, who is also a child and family therapist. So, Sarah, we got to hang out a couple of weeks ago and do a podcast, and they must have liked us hanging out because we get to do it again. But today we're not talking about necessarily our kids. We're talking about ourselves and the importance of self-care. So you recently wrote a blog on our website, and so you're going to talk a little bit today about what you wrote about and the importance of self-care. So thanks for coming.
Yeah, so it's something I talk about a lot in sessions, and I thought it'd just be a great thing to kind of go a little bit more depth into. I feel like, there's all the memes and the Pinterest quotes about like, you can't pour from an empty cup. And that's totally true. But I think the thing is that it's not just about having a full cup, because you can pour into your cup, but it can still be empty. Mm-hmm. So when I talk about like the cup metaphor, I just think there's a lot more to it.
Awesome. Yeah. Your article had some really good examples of different ways to consider how you are getting the self-care, or if you're almost maybe doing it in a way that you think you are, but it's not actually really helping you or being beneficial.
Yeah. And so like, I think about like, first of all, like, okay, you can't pour from an empty cup. So yeah, you do need to be full. Like you need to have life-giving relationships. You need to have, appropriate food, water, sleep to the best of your ability if you're a parent. Sometimes that's not the best you can do, but
right.
you need all those things. But if you have a hole in the bottom of your cup, or your cup is broken, like it doesn't matter how much you pour in, there's nothing keeping it there. And so I think that's like, oh, like, let me just do all these good things. And sometimes even the good things, like, people will say like, well, you have to do yoga for self-care. If it's not your jam and it's stressing you out and it's stressing your budget, it's probably actually draining from your cup. Mm-hmm. And then if you've got a hole in your cup, like you got to fix that, because it doesn't matter how much good stuff, it's not going to stay there. And that, the hole might be because you have somebody who's drawing on you more than you have to give and you need support. It might be because you have a wound that you need to work on in therapy, that's keeping you from holding the good stuff. It might even be like a chronic health thing that you're like, I just can't get enough, and you need to address that health thing. Like if you have a sleep issue, no matter how much yoga you do, if you're not sleeping, it's not going to fix it.
Yeah. That's good. And so kind of going to your first point about finding what is good self-care for you. And I actually feel like this is something that I have been trying to rediscover for myself, because I think when we go through different seasons of life, what maybe was helpful for us is not really helpful anymore.
Right.
And so I've even learned this year, now that I'm starting to get a little bit older, going to get my, nails done is not really the self-care it used to be when I was younger. Now it's like actually going to the chiropractor or like getting more like intentional about my own personal health. So can you touch on that a little bit? How do people kind of navigate that? Because I think you had a really good point about, we hear of somebody else's self-care, we're like, oh, I could do that, but that's not really beneficial for us personally.
Well, I think it can just be because it's become kind of the buzzword. It can be very regimented, like, you have to do yoga, you have to get your nails done, you have to take bubble baths, etc. And it might just be taking 5 quiet minutes. When we talk about marriages, a lot of times we're like, well, have a weekly date night. Sometimes your kids' needs are so great that you can't, or your financial situation is such that you can't. But how do you find something life-giving? That's the way I look at it, is what is life-giving? What is going to give you the energy that you need to keep going? So yeah, if you're in pain, you need to get your back adjusted so that you can go forward. Like if your back is out and you're sitting there getting your toes painted in a chair, it's probably not doing a whole lot for you, because you're sitting there in agony going like, I got to get to the chiropractor. It's just taking time from me.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think even helpful too that we talk with a lot of the clients that we work with, just being in tune with our own body too, and just really being diligent about thinking about what we need. Self-care doesn't have to be, something that is for one, hour each week. It can be something that is ongoing and is kind of the self-discovery of, no, actually, this is really therapeutic for me, both physically and emotionally. I feel like I'm able to close off my brain, or I'm able to, like you said, maybe see physical benefits to being more intentional about my health. So I think all that's really good and helpful for our families.
Yeah. And I think we do a lot with trauma and attachment here. And I think we have to remember that, if you have a history of trauma, like that's something that like disconnects your brain and your body. Mm-hmm. And so sometimes self-care is just slowly working on trying to get back in tune with yourself. Maybe you don't really know what you like or what feels good for your body. And maybe that's just that small step of self-care.
Yeah. Can you talk about that a little bit more? Because I love that you mentioned that, because in the family coaching, one thing that I've been seeing with a lot of the families I'm working with, and granted, we're coming off of the holidays and kind of a stressful season anyway, so I think it's absolutely appropriate and not necessarily a surprise, but a lot of families that I tend to work with sometimes, they really struggle with that balance because they do see their kids with trauma. And feel like really a lot of people don't understand their trauma. I'm really the only person that can even calm them down. So I feel like I am limiting myself to, maybe the time away I am from my kid, or even if I do have something for myself, that will be the first thing I take off my calendar because I need to attend to my kids' needs. But you kind of touched on that could be triggering some of our own trauma, or we can have secondary trauma as parents. Yeah. Can you maybe even just talk about that a little bit more? Or, we all have a window of tolerance too. Yeah. And so naturally, if we're going through stressors or difficult things in life, that window is going to get smaller, which is even why it's that much more crucial that we, have self-care. So I don't know if you want to touch on that a little bit as well.
Yeah, and I think that kind of goes back to that you can't pour from an empty cup. And if you're just completely like tired out, stressed out, it's going to be harder to tolerate your kids' hard behaviors.
Yes.
It's going to be harder to even know what you need to ask for help. So I think sometimes you just get to your wit's end and you're like, I need some help, but I don't even know what that would look like. Mm-hmm. So just honoring that, hey, this has to be kind of a deal breaker thing. I really need to be able to get out in nature once a week. And if that means that I have to, work with my referring agency to get respite, or, take my kid with me in the stroller, I've got to do it.
Yeah.
And just kind of making it a non-negotiable.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so true, because we can't meet our child's needs or even those behavioral things if we're not in a spot where we can even tolerate it ourselves. So, but it's not natural. And I think as parents that, guilt or that feeling the obligation to put their child first. And I think, there's goodness in that, but also we have to take care of ourselves too. And it's just not realistic. That's going to minimize our ability to really meet our kiddo and their needs. Yeah,
well, I think that there's the modeling piece of saying you know what, I want you to do good things for yourself. I have to do these things. But it's also, it can be selfish. I'm not going to do anything with you because I'm painting my nails right now. But it can also be I really need to do this so that I can get in a right place to help you with your homework because I know it's going to be hard.
Right.
So I think it's kind of more about focus than it is about the actual activity.
Yeah, that's good. Okay, so then you also talked in your article about maybe having a cup that has a hole in it. Can you kind of explain and elaborate on that a little bit more?
Yeah, that's kind of what I was saying as far as maybe you have a physical need that's keeping you from sleeping. If you do have a history of trauma, it can be hard to hold on to the good stuff because that can feel kind of scary. Maybe you have a relationship issue of your own with your partner, with your spouse, with a parent that you really need to address because that's just going to kind of keep sucking the life out of you. So, again, no matter how much good stuff you put in, it's just going to kind of go out because you're not meeting this need and addressing this issue that's really a big issue.
Yeah, yeah. And your article, I read it, and it's so good. And I think kind of what you're talking about here, too, is even establishing probably some healthy boundaries with people. And I think boundaries, we hear that word a lot, and we hear about, needing to establish them and that they create healthier relationships in the end. But I think for a lot of people, that is really nerve-wracking to think about, or to be actually, I don't, what if it hurts the relationship? So I don't know if you can even touch on that a little bit with this analogy, or it sounds like you use this quite a bit with a lot of the parents and families that you work with. So I don't know if any of them ever bring up that topic with you or that discussion.
Yeah, I think that, can kind of go into who are you allowing to speak into your life. And I think sometimes we have well-meaning people who love us, who just aren't in a place that they can really give us good feedback. I think especially when we're dealing with things like adoption, that we do a lot here, or foster care. Blessings on all the people who want so badly to support it. But if you're not in that world, sometimes the best advice that you want to give, it's not going to fit for that child.
Yeah.
And so I think sometimes that can almost be a hole of like, I've said this person can speak into my life. Now I have to follow their advice. And again, well-meaning advice, but it just doesn't work for our kids.
Yeah.
So to just kind of have a boundary of like, you know what, I can let other people speak to me. I can, develop a good, healthy self-confidence, but I don't necessarily have to take that in.
Right.
Which kind of goes to like my metaphor of your cup can also be full of not good stuff. Mm-hmm. So you want to pour into your cup so that you have good stuff to overflow, but I think we can also like start taking in stuff that isn't good. So maybe that's well-meaning but misplaced advice. Maybe it's like just social media, other things that give us like a false impression of what we should be. Maybe it's just that we've got really too much stress and it's just sloshing over. Like I use the cup analogy of like, okay, I've got coffee in my cup and it's so full that I add a little bit of creamer and it goes, whoosh and overflows. Right. Are we keeping our stress levels low enough so that we can tolerate, when somebody cuts us off in traffic or our kid forgets their lunch or something spills and we don't just lose it, kind of the straw that breaks the camel's back idea. Right. But like if our cup is so full of stress, we got to put up some boundaries. We got to maybe put a lid on and say like, okay, like maybe this is a good thing. For example, like some physical forms of exercise can be too much stress for your body at certain times. So just like, nope, putting a lid on it. I can do what my body needs to feel good, but this is too much. Or, you know what? It'd be great if my kid could play soccer and basketball at the same time, but that is not going to be healthy for our family. It's a good thing, but too much stress. Or maybe it is that we're trying to do too many things. I know a lot of our parents who are foster and adoptive parents, they want to volunteer at church. They want to volunteer at their kids' school. They want to, help others. And their kids' needs are so big that in order to be able to tolerate and have space for their kiddo, they have to say, no, I'm sorry, not for this season.
Right.
Because they need to serve within their home. So I think that's an important thing to think about is the cup of like, okay, good stuff, but it can also fill up with bad stuff, whether it's because of permeable boundaries or because we're taking in things that aren't helpful or because we got too much on our plates.
Yeah. No, Sarah, you said so many good things that I feel like I can touch on every little thing that you're saying. But one thing I will comment on is as a foster parent myself, there definitely are these seasons too where I am wanting some wisdom and discernment from other people, right? Because it's hard. And nobody, like you said, there's a lot of people that don't understand our family system. They don't understand that we parent our kids way different than maybe some of, our friends do. And there can be these moments where there is frustration because people have the best intentions, but they just don't understand maybe the trauma of our kiddos. And then that kind of leads us to then maybe seek out other foster parents. And while there's goodness in that too, it's really easy to look at one other family's case and then compare it to our own. And then that has some unhealthy consequences too. So it's kind of walking this fine line. So I know for me, what I have found helpful is actually to go to therapy myself or a spiritual director. I think for me, this ministry, I love it. I'm so blessed to be a part of it, but it is so hard. And as a believer, there are some times where I'm like, God, what are you doing? Why did you call me to this ministry? So even getting a spiritual director, somebody who is speaking into me and reminding me about why I did this ministry in the first place and how God is inviting us into this ministry. But that's been helpful for me because that's somebody who doesn't know me and they're speaking into me and speaking this truth that I feel like is sometimes helpful to even have that boundary versus maybe friends of mine who are fostering, who it's hard not to compare our cases, or people who aren't fostering and are parenting different and out of the goodness of their own heart are just trying to help us when they see our kids going through these behavioral issues. So that was something that I really took away from with what you're saying is we do need to fill our cup, but there can be some negative things if we're not careful. So that was really helpful and cool to hear from you.
Yeah, I think, you kind of touched on this, but I feel like a lot of it is Holy Spirit discernment because there is a community aspect. Like I said, part of getting our cups filled is relational. Yeah. But sometimes those relationships can be difficult. I encourage people to think about when they like join online support groups, whether it be for a mental illness, whether it be for a fair recovery, or they're, adoptive and foster kiddos. Sometimes like it can be really like empowering to be like, okay, I'm not the only one. I don't feel alone.
Right.
But then right on the flip side, it can be like, oh my goodness, this could happen to me. I'm so overwhelmed. Now I'm looking for more bad things to happen. And so you're filling your cup with a lot of stressors of other people that just aren't yours. So I think it requires a lot of Holy Spirit discernment to know, okay, what do I need? And that's, again, going back, getting in touch with ourselves and saying, what do I need? What is life-giving? Maybe it is life-giving to be part of that support group. Go for it.
Right.
Maybe you need to step out and just go, do something completely unrelated. It's hard to know, but it's good to seek out that wisdom.
Yeah, but even more important than that, we are constantly seeking out and trying to discover what is good self-care for us. Because like you said, there might be some things in one season that it was really good to say yes to, but what you're talking about in your article is also, self-care is also learning to say no to some things too. And you did kind of touch on that, maybe last year we were able to do baseball and soccer, but this year that is just not feasible for us as a family. So it is actually going to say no and navigating that conversation with our kids, saying maybe no to different support groups, or maybe not going to things as frequently as that doesn't mean we don't have to take everything away, but maybe it's knowing, I can maybe go to the support group, but I need to go once a month rather than every week, or trying to find a healthy balance is kind of what I hear you saying. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, and I kind of talked in the beginning about, if you have a hole in your cup for the good stuff, that's bad. But, when you do have stress, which we all do to varying degrees, you almost want that, like, thing that you can, like, the release valve of, like, how do I release that? Because, we can, like, put the lid on it and say, don't fill it any further, but we also need to be able to, like, drain some stuff out.
Right.
If we've got too much stress. So that's another kind of piece of it, is what does it look like to kind of release some of this? Is it a prayer practice? Is it some type of physical practice? Is it journaling? Like, what do you need to do to release that? So it's the filling, but it's also the releasing. It's the covering. It's not just like, fill up your cup, don't pour out if you don't have anything in there. It's so much more than that.
Right. Yeah. And so, I want to just read two things that you put on here that I think are just kind of helpful as we kind of wrap up and summarize everything that we're talking about. But there is a definition, or a good full cup and then a bad full cup. And so I just kind of want to touch on that before we wrap up. But a cup that is full, and it's a good to be full, is that your needs are being met and there's something to give. Can you talk about that a little bit? And then we'll talk about what a bad full cup looks like.
That's just the idea of, like, physically, spiritually, mentally, emotionally, relationally, I have what I need. I'm feeling in a good place. So my cup is full. That's where you have something to give. I have the ability to tolerate my child's behavior. I have the ability to give grace to my spouse when they don't meet my expectations. I'm not blowing a gasket when I get a call at work from somebody who's disgruntled. My window of tolerance is large. If we want to use that, like, I'm in a good spot.
Right.
And then the full bad cup is the idea that I've got too much stress and just a little bit is going to cause me to explode. So if somebody cuts me off in traffic, like I gave the example, I'm going to let something out of my mouth that I don't want my children to overhear. Or I just can't take it if my kid makes one more sound. Or, if my spouse comes home and forgot something on the grocery list, I'm going to lose it. So just that cup of, like, it can't tolerate anymore. There's not room for the things that are going to happen today because I'm so stressed. I'm so low on anything. Food, water, sleep, relationships, that type of thing.
Awesome. Yeah, that's so good. And such a simple concept, but it's putting it into practice that is what's really challenging. So for any of our families or parents or anybody that's just listening to our podcast, or maybe goes online and looks at this article, that would just be something that I would encourage that you take the words that Sarah is saying today and thinking about that. Yeah, do I feel like these little stressors that don't normally bother me are starting to resurface all the time, and I do not have this I feel limited in how I can handle it, or I'm kind of a ticking time bomb, right? Where it's like anything can make me snap, or is it, no, actually, I feel like I'm in a season where I am being fed, maybe that's spiritually or physically, you're active right now, or you feel like your relationships are life-giving, and feeling like because your needs are being met, you're able to maybe meet the needs of others. So it's such a good topic to discuss, Sarah, especially I think we, meet with so many different people for various reasons. But I know for me, parents are near and dear to my heart just because that's something that I'm going through too with trauma with the kiddos in my own home. And I think this is a topic that really needs to be one of the first conversations we have with parents, because I think a lot of times we want to help our kids address whatever's going on with them, but we can't even get our kids to that place of being willing to address everything and move forward from it if we ourselves are not aware of what our own abilities are and what our limits are in helping them get to that. So I think that's a really good topic.
It really does start with us. We got to take responsibility for ourselves. Yes, we need to, before God, be responsible for the kiddos if we have kiddos, but it starts with us.
Yeah, so good. Well, thank you, Sarah, for bringing this topic in our podcast today. Or you can also view her article at our website, Arizona Family Counseling, if you just click on resources and go down to the blog. And thank you so much for joining us today.